And I'd like to thank Mr. Big Voice again for his usual introduction. There was a few brief minutes yesterday where I was busy with some other obligations during the course of the day, but I had a few brief minutes yesterday to listen to the opening of Rush Limbaugh's show. And he was saying, you got to realize he is like Elvis Presley was to rock and roll when it comes to talk radio. So he is atop the heap, the king, if you will, of talk radio. It's not Larry King, it's Rush Limbaugh who is the king of talk radio. He was saying it was one of those days where people said there's nothing really that's worthy of a top story or a lead in the course of your program. And he said, oh, to the contrary. And then he rattled off a list of things. And some days you just have so many all at once. It is difficult to categorize what is actually the top story because you have 4 or 5, maybe 6 different things that are competing with that. A lot of what we'll be talking about today is maybe less related to Idaho. I've got a couple of things about raises for school teachers. We may get to that, as well as background checks on school teachers and laws about human trafficking, which we already have on the books. It's just, semantics. It's called something else, but it sounds good, and it makes it sound as if certain people in the legislature are working hard to get the job done for you. They all tell you they work really, really hard. Not like those dairy farmers, not like those guys, carrying a pack through a mountain pass in Afghanistan, or some guy sweating in a steel mill. No, your legislators are the hardest working people you'll ever come across. Just ask them. They'll tell you that. But what we've got going on today, and just a few things perhaps we'll get to in the first hour, Twin Falls Police Department scheduled to come by about 8:30 this morning, and they'll just have some details about some things that they're working on, and they'll share that with us during the course of the program. Also, the weather in some parts of the country. There was a weather map posted last night in one of the East Coast newspapers that showed the country split almost down the middle, almost from the Mississippi River west. The map is a red or orange for warmer temperatures, and from the Mississippi River east, and we're talking Florida too, the weather map is blue, different shades of blue representing the cold that those people are dealing with. So the global warming enthusiasts will tell you, well, see, it's not that we're wrong because half the country is warm. But I've been reading a lot over the last couple of days about sunspot activity, which is basically nil lately. And perhaps that has something to do with it. And in fact, if you go back throughout history, you can track sunspot activity and get pretty much the same weather patterns that we're getting now, long before anyone built a smokestack. These things were actually taking place. But they don't want you to consider that because, well, how can you destroy capitalism if you don't buy into what they're selling? And finally, it's funny that they're selling something and they don't like capitalism, isn't it? Finally, the President of the United States, there is a photograph of him. I happened to see this at Drudge this morning. And I'm not one of those show hosts who prepares a show just from what he reads on Drudge. I've got a long email list every day from various sources where I get details on various issues and topics that are going on. But I do tend to look at Drudge before I go to bed in the evening and as I'm getting ready in the morning for work. And there is a photograph that they have put at the top of the page. Well, it was there a bit earlier today. And in that photograph, it's from one of the New York City tabloids. It's a photograph. It's a full-page photograph, front page of President Obama, and he's wearing a blindfold. Now, for 2 days, they had these discussions, 2 or 3 days, I believe it's just 2, about how to deal with terrorism. And they still keep coming out at the White House, and they still keep saying, well, it's not Islam that's dangerous. We're fighting extremism. Okay. Yes, but what type of extremism? Oh, just extremism. That's all. We're only fighting extremism. It has nothing to do with anybody. And then he keeps saying, oh, this is not, what does he call it? I'm trying to think of the word they use when you're talking about computer programs. This is a corrupted version of Islam. Well, he should know, having spent 4 years with his stepfather Lolo in Indonesia, going to one of those madrasas, is that what they call them? Those schools or madrasas, where he was being inculcated in all of this while he was a young man. But I'm telling you right now, and I shared it at the Facebook page of News Radio 1310 KLIX yesterday, a story from The Atlantic, which is not a conservative magazine, a story from The Atlantic which says, oh, indeed, this group ISIS is actually following the tenets of faith. It would be as if we suddenly started following the dietary laws from the Old Testament and enforcing them amongst our neighbors. Going door to door, kicking down their doors and making sure that they're not eating anything from cloven hoof, for instance. And then if they were, taking them outside and crucifying them or stoning them to death. Or if you were to go into your neighbor's house and say, I understand that you've been practicing homosexual behavior, and then dragging them outside and stoning them to death. And we're not doing that in the Western world because we're no longer interpreting our faith in quite the same way. But ISIS actually is interpreting its faith that way, and it is an extremely accurate interpretation of the Quran from the 600s, from about 1,500 years ago, almost 1,500 years ago. So when he says that, he's throwing up a bit of a smokescreen, and I have just page after page today of various responses. People like Michelle Malkin. Here's one from Monica Crowley, who I really like, except the fact that she's got to sit at a Thanksgiving dinner table with her brother-in-law, Alan Combs, every year. She says, this is in the Washington Times. If you have access to it via computer, you could check this out. She says, just days after the Islamic State beheaded 21 Christians in Libya, the White House welcomed domestic and foreign representatives from law enforcement, government, and religious groups, including the extremist society, Islamic Society of Boston. I didn't know there was such a thing. To a glorified coffee klatch called the Summit on Countering Violent Extremism. And then she has a parody here as she's writing from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. She writes, Islam, anyone, Bueller. Team Obama, she says, classifies an array of folks as violent extremists and goes on to point out, 6 years ago, spring of 2009, the Department of Homeland Security issued a report that warned against the possibility of violence by unnamed right-wing extremists concerned about illegal immigration, increasing government power, restrictions on firearms, abortion, and the loss of U.S. sovereignty. It also identified returning war veterans as particular threats, ominously suggesting that, quote, facing significant challenges reintegrating into their communities could lead to the potential emergence of terrorist groups or lone wolf extremists capable of carrying out violent attacks, unquote. So, in other words, they have, in the past, gone into some detail about who they believe extremists might be. Tea Party members, veterans, people who don't like paying a lot of taxes, people who are concerned about the porous border along the Rio Grande and, of course, the southwestern desert. Yeah, those people are extremists, according to the Obama White House. But a guy running around screaming, Allahu Akbar, and then slicing some guy's head off, he's just an extremist. There's no actual cause behind it. He's just an angry fellow. And if he only had a decent paying job making, $15 an hour minimum wage, then he might not be joining the extremist network. That's the belief they have. That the one woman who came out, the deputy press secretary from the State Department the other day, was doing an interview. Even Chris Matthews, socialist Chris Matthews, was incredulous when she was saying that. And he went on his program afterwards and gave a stinging commentary at the end about how we are being humiliated and this White House is allowing it to continue. At some point, someone has to say the emperor is wearing no clothes, because no one can possibly even believe what they're saying inside the Obama White House. But like some old Soviet apparatchiks, they just keep repeating it over and over and over again, hoping that somehow people will accept that as truth. It's not working. How steep is their learning curve? Well, that's a ridiculous question, isn't it? But as I say, I have this from Michelle Malkin as well. And she says, instead of killing jihadists, keeping them off of our soil, locking up their poisonous spiritual agitators, and shutting off their terror funding pipelines, the president called on America and the world to invest in unnamed immigrant communities vulnerable to unnamed extremism. So they want your tax dollars. And they're going to take money away from you because, well, of course, you're a privileged white Christian, and they're going to give it to these people because it's only fair. Some of the most generous welfare states on the planet, she writes, have suffered horrific jihad attacks this year. Liberal Denmark's soft-on-jihad rehab program has been a disaster. There, of course, was the latest attack we saw just a few days ago. She goes on to say Vice President Joe Biden opened the convention of jihad coddlers on Tuesday by emphasizing the need to respect and also for a sense of community. Yeah, we're burning people in cages, we're chopping off their heads, we're crucifying them, we're raping women, but we've got to respect these people, because if they just had a decent job as an accountant, they wouldn't be pulling these crimes, would they? And she says social justice warriors are united, less marginalization, more midnight basketball. And then she writes, what a bloody crock. States like Minnesota and Maine have bent over backwards to resettle thousands upon thousands of Somalis, putting their demands for halal food, freebies, taxpayer-funded foot baths, and cultural sensitivity over the safety and well-being of native-born citizens and taxpayers struggling to make ends meet. Your government has abandoned you, and they're not making any apologies about it. Telephone number to reach our program, 736-0300. It's 817. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story, 38 at our studios, and you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and online, newsradio1310.com. You're up next.
Yeah, Bill, you know how Obama came out of nowhere, basically, and won the presidency?
Yes.
You know, and then ISIS has advanced so much farther than Osama bin Laden had really envisioned. And so nowadays, these types of things are occurring with such speed that anything is possible, including a hit on our own soil by these people. And, you know, if I was Italy and I was involved with the Catholic hierarchy, I would be very concerned that the Italian government and the people at the Catholic hierarchy would be very concerned about what is capable or could possibly happen, because things occur so fast now that it's truly amazing.
And again, you know, Pope Francis described the other day by Charles Krauthammer as not being a revanchist. That is, he's not trying to reconquer former Christian territory. He's a pretty subdued guy. Even he has been saying, he's ringing the alarm bell now, saying something's got to happen. Something's got to break. Thank you much for the call and your input, too, as well. We have a break coming up in just a few seconds, but I will do whatever I can to take more of your telephone calls on the other side of that. I just wanted to get through some of those initial comments this morning coming from various people who are just absolutely gobsmacked by what this president is doing and what his White House is. You know, when his attorney general says we are not in a state of war, where has he been? He contradicts even Scary John Kerry, the Secretary of State, when those claims are made. And nobody seems to. Jimmy Breslin had a book years ago, and I'll borrow the title, completely different story, but let me borrow the title, The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight. Well, that's the people who are running the country right now. And good golly, you know, we have to be worried about these attacks coming in all sorts of places any longer. And yes, they don't have to be mass casualty attacks. They happen in places like Nebraska where people are beheaded in the workplace, or they're just going to pop up. Yesterday, the imam in, was it Detroit, that was arrested and accused of sexually abusing a 23-year-old woman in his employ? The New York Times had described him as the Billy Graham of Islam. Well, nobody ever accused Billy Graham of anything untoward like that. And yet, they're amongst us. And I'm not saying that they're all going to be looking to cut your throat, but if only 10% are, we've got a problem. More details on this subject on the way. 20 after 8, 38 at our studios. News Radio 1310 KLIX and Top Story. Wall Street Journal has a piece on all of this today called The Ideological Islamic Threat. It's amazing what you can find. I've been going through all of these different websites this morning, and the volume of ink being spilled, well, I guess on a web you wouldn't call it that. Electrons? The volume that is being spilled on this, here's one, Cal Thomas, Barack Obama, America's Nero, making a reference to Nero fiddling while Rome burned. And here's another one, White House, it's not just about Islamic extremists. That's from Paige Winfield Cunningham at the Washington Examiner. Timothy P. Carney, who's a great writer for the Examiner, as well as a number of other publications in Washington, says the president attacked Libya in 2011 without congressional authority and then shirked any responsibility to help stabilize the country after deposing its dictator. By 2013, Libya had become a chaotic hellhole. Mired in a permanent war, today it is now the beachhead and recruiting ground for the Islamic State. Gaddafi was evil, but the lawless power vacuum he left may already be worse. Now, Hillary Clinton was involved in all of this too, and she has designs on succeeding President Obama. They toppled the government in Egypt, which led to the Islamic Brotherhood taking over. They toppled the government in Libya, which led to ISIS taking over. And so what are they trying to do? What is their end game? Are they that... See, you've got two choices here. They are that incredibly stupid about what's going to happen in these situations, or they want it to happen. And the latter is, I think, the most frightening. Now, this woman, Clinton, she's taking money from a lot of these dangerous governments in that part of the world for the Clinton Foundation. You don't think that they're investing in her presidency because they want something in return. It's not like they're giving her money because, oh, she's so very good looking, I will give her another couple of $1 million. No. They're expecting quid pro quo when all of this is over. Our last caller, and you can reach the program, it's 825, 38 now at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Our telephone number is 736-0300. Our last caller said bin Laden never foresaw this. He had predicted, in fact, that this would not come about until long after he was dead, not expecting to die within the next few years. And yet here he's gone, and this thing has come about so quickly. And a lot of the people who had been working within his organization simply became more and more convinced that this was the route to go. He was much more political. They are doing this because they believe in it. And again, the White House doesn't seem to be able to understand that. You're up next, and you're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX. What's on your mind?
Bill, this is Pat.
Yes.
And this is a personal feeling that he was raised by Muslims. I think in his heart he is a Muslim, and he cannot see anything wrong that Muslims can do. And he's not a true American. I believe that he has no idea what America is about. He only has the dreams of his father, which was Muslims. And I believe that his end game is allow Europe and all of Northern Africa to become Muslim.
The thing is, when he first became president, he said America is not an exceptional country. He went over to Cairo, in fact, and spoke at a university there and said everybody feels their country is somehow exceptional and ours is no better. And then he went on to say, and the United States is an atheist country. Well, how they heard that in that part of the world was, we don't believe in God. And
he hasn't lived. He hasn't been in the real America. He's living in some place. I don't know where it's at, but it's not anything to do with the true America that we have grown up with, and we hope our children are going to inherit.
Well, even his time in Chicago, when you say real America, that's questionable.
So anyway, well, thank you, Bill.
Sure. Thank you for your time. 828 now on the program. You can also reach me by email at bill.colley. I spell that Colley, bill.colley at townsquaremedia.com. Look, these people just have lost their minds. I can't imagine that they could be that sinister and that they would be able to do it in such plain sight, because even some people in the media are getting a little antsy with this. The people who've normally, been performing the Lewinsky on him on a daily basis for the last 6 or 7 years, they're getting antsy with his approach to all of this. But it's not just him. I read a great criticism today at Accuracy in Media, and one of the writers there was saying that you've got to look at the Republicans in Congress as well. And they keep saying, oh, he's not doing anything to take care of this, so we will. First of all, we're going to put together a committee and study it. Well, wait a minute. How many more people have to die while you're studying it? Well, we've got to make darn sure that we're doing the right thing. Well, you've just said the president isn't. So what's the right thing? The right thing is going in there and smashing these people to smithereens. Yes, but we need to take some time and look at all the details and check the weather forecast and find out exactly if it's a lucky Friday or if it's Friday the 13th. Or, we've got all of these issues we have to settle at the House of Representatives and over at the U.S. Senate first. So they're not exactly what you would call exhibiting what you'd call in any way bravery. 8:30. We've got a short break where we're going to hear from some of our fine sponsors. In fact, I've got some news on some of our fine sponsors in a few minutes that I'll share with you. They keep the lights on here at News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. A little later in the program, I want to address this notion that the world is getting warmer and frying to a crisp. My sister, for the second time in about 5 days, will not have a daytime high where she lives above zero. And those people are just begging for a little global warming. A little later in the program, more details on that coming up. So I walked out of the room for a minute, had a little business to do, and I came back into the broadcast studio, and I had not noticed this earlier. There was a yellow flower that was sitting on the floor in here. And it's missing its stem, but it was on the floor. And at first I thought, gee, yesterday was Ash Wednesday. All I got was some burned palm fronds smeared across my forehead, and Benito must have gotten a flower. But I looked it over and I realized it may well be related to the Home and Garden Show coming up this weekend, which we'll be taking part in. In fact, I'm going to be at the booth that we have there. That I'll be manning that for a couple of hours each day over the weekend. And my job is to sit there and say, we now have a prize giveaway. Please, in an orderly fashion, come to the table. And if you're not orderly about it, I don't know. There may be some sort of punishment, but we'll discuss that after the show. We have 4 prizes that will be valued at $1,000 each. If you win, you pick the prize you like best. $1,000 towards ABC Seamless Gutters, ABC the siding without the quacks. Number 2, this is another choice, a Green Mountain Daniel Boone grill from Brazil Heating and Air Conditioning. Includes a digital control, a meat probe, peak lid for chicken, large fowl, and 2 bags of pellets. Now, I'm wondering, if you're using the Daniel Boone grill, does that mean you have to wear the coonskin cap? Well, you're actually, see, on a really hot summer day, I don't know that would be very comfortable. Number 3, a weekend getaway to Seattle from New View Glass. Round trip it's a round trip air, in fact. You don't have to walk it. For 2 and 2 nights, 2 days and 2 nights at the 4-star Edgewater Inn. And also number 4, a $1,000 custom vanity from Premier Woodworking. I know somebody who would go for that first. And so luckily she can't compete because she's practically related to me. See how their custom LED lighting can change the beauty and function of your kitchen at the Home and Garden Show. See them at the Home and Garden Show and learn to maximize space efficiency in your kitchen with the team at Premier. Enter to win at newsradio1310.com. So there you have it. And one other quick message. You may have heard someone in the studio with us yesterday talking about picking up a few extra dollars driving school bus. Western States Bus Services hiring part-time bus drivers right now, split shifts, 5 days per week. Summers off and scheduled no school days. The pay, $10.75 an hour. Apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. If you'd like to reach Bill Colley this morning at Top Story, you can give me a shout. That telephone number is 736-0300. I have a caller with me waiting on hold right now as we speak. 736-0300. It's 39 at our studios, coming up on 8:37. And you're up next on newsradio1310.com. What's on your mind?
Good morning, Bill. With all the, they've just within the last few days, they've stated that they're going to give the jihadists the ability to call in airstrikes. They've been putting French aircraft on American carriers. Who are these people going to be hitting now? This government is fighting against America, is what's going on here. They hate Americans, obviously. Their purpose is to destroy America and make it a part of the world government.
I think there's a good possibility we're headed that way. You've got to remember, throughout history, the communists, and Lenin, and even before him, Marx, they were all on board with the Islamic peoples because they thought they would be a good front in the revolution to take down capitalism. Yeah. And then I guess the two would fight it out at some point at the end. But they felt, obviously, that they had the better weaponry at the time. Thank you much for the call, sir. The president right now is delivering his closing remarks on his summit on extremism. And I'm looking at the closed caption. Unfortunately, when you read closed caption, you realize, well, they're working hard to make the words look like they sound. But you see some rather unusual words come up there. He's talking about ungoverned spaces where terrorists find safe haven so they can push back. I see. That's what I mean about closed captioning. Push back against groups. In Iraq and Syria, our coalition of some 60 nations, including Arab nations, will not, lent in our mission to degrade, like I say, closed captioning, ultimately destroy ISIL. See, he always has to call it ISIL. Everyone else is calling it by another name. But he actually gives it a broader, because he's talking about the Islamic, the army in the Levant, which the Levant is an ancient area from back in the time of the Crusades, which covers a huge swath of territory. Modern Israel, the little tiny Palestinian state, Jordan, Lebanon, All of that. And he's actually giving them a higher priority in that sense, that as if somehow they have a legitimacy to a claim to all of that land. And again, it's these language choices that come out of the mouth of this man when he berates Christians, for instance. It's funny. He says that there was no extremism involved in the sense that it was Islamic extremism when 21 Christians were beheaded. But when an atheist, who actually had said on Facebook he liked Muslims better than Christians, killed 3 Muslims when he was angry over a parking space a couple of weeks ago, then the president said it was a hate crime because Muslims had been killed. The religious faith had nothing to do with it in that case. How can this man continually get it so wrong? And yet, there must be people out. One poll yesterday said his approval rating was back at 50%. They must be doing a wonderful, wonderful job of passing out the Obama phones, the Doritos, and the malt liquor and whatever else these people are consuming. That say when someone calls them, "Do you like the president's performance?" "Why, yes. I just got a whole sack full of toys." 20 minutes now from 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story. Oh, also, want to talk a little bit about weather, as I said, a little later in the program. I just decided to pull up on the computer. Isn't the internet great? We'll talk about efforts later to shut it down, but I just pulled up a temperature from the town where my sister lives in the northern Alleghenies. She lives in the foothills, and so it's actually colder probably in the higher peaks. But I'm looking at their weather forecast where she lives for the next few days. They're expecting an overnight low, according to this, from MSN.com weather. Expecting an overnight low going into tomorrow morning of 17 below zero. Now, it gets cold there. I remember being a kid growing up, and I was walking to school one day, and I just had my Letterman jacket on, and that was it. And I grabbed some books, and I carried my books without a hat or gloves. I only had, we're talking a small town with 2 traffic lights, a 3-block walk to school. But my ears and my fingers were certainly nippy by the time I got there. And that's when one of my teachers said, "It's 18 below. What are you doing?" Of course, today they wouldn't have school if it was 18 below. Because, of course, we have to ensure that our children face no adversity whatsoever in life. It's 8:44. Bill Colley with you on Top Story at News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. They had a 17 below morning the other day. In fact, I think it was Monday, which is not President's Day. It's still technically Washington's birthday, no matter what the media tries to tell you. That's what the national government, federal government, still calls it Washington's birthday. She went out to walk the dog in the morning just about sunrise. It was 17 below that morning at the time she went outside. Now, it's not unusual in that part of the country to have some cold, but they've been experiencing this for weeks on end. She said it's been well over a month since they've had a day with the temperature over freezing. Niagara Falls has frozen. A man climbed to the top of Niagara Falls as if he was scaling a mountain. He climbed the ice at the falls to get to the top of it in a stunt the other day. Lake Erie, which does freeze more frequently. Lake Ontario never freezes. It's huge. Superior doesn't freeze because it's just the size of the body of water. Lake Erie will freeze in many spots. It's already at 94% ice coverage, which is about an all-time record, or very close to an all-time record now that that's happened. So the weather there is very brutal. All you have to do is turn on any of the typical Alphabet Network morning shows. Today, Good Morning America, and then the one over on CBS nobody ever watches. They have a morning show? You're kidding me. When did that start? Oh, about 60 years ago. Oh. If somebody at the CBS Morning News had to go to the witness protection program, it would not be a problem. Trust me. 8:46 now on our show. So I'm talking about this situation with the weather, and yet on the AP wire, we're reading today because really west of the Mississippi, well, parts of the Dakotas, which are west of the Mississippi, are cold, but that's not unusual this time of year, maybe even eastern Montana. But everything from Nebraska west, a little to the south, and everything west of probably Helena, Montana, is considered right now to be warmer than normal. And things look pretty good around here. But there is a story on the AP wire that says that the drought conditions in southwestern Idaho are expected to continue because of the lack of snow up in the mountains this winter. And some of the stories that I've seen over the last week have focused on how nasty the weather is in a place like Boston, but how nice the weather is in a place like Seattle. So what we're dealing with here, and I think it's fairly simple to say, what we're dealing with here is just the typical nuances of winter weather. The thing is, the last few days, several friends have been sending me details on something called sunspot theory and how that impacts the weather. Now, that has nothing to do with any of us. In fact, a friend of mine sent me a link today from something called the Suspicious Observer, suspiciousobservers.org. And what they do is they have a daily video talking about conditions and the like, and really sunspot activity, speaking of records, might be at a low right now. And yet, if you track it over the last several decades or maybe back a couple of centuries, you'll find that it does have a huge impact on the weather, much more so than anyone here has on the weather. We have a caller with us. 736-0300 is the number. And you're up next on News Radio 1310 KLIX with Bill Colley on Top Story. What's up with you?
Not much. How are you doing today?
Well, what's on your mind?
Well, the whole sun thing, some of the things that amazed me doing some of my own research is I found that the White House advisors for this whole global warming thing, all their scale models that they've written out and figured and how everything is being affected, the sun is never a deciding factor. They don't even talk about the sun. So how can they say there's global warming when they don't even look at all the elements that affect our climate?
Sure.
And and you're talking about the sunspots and stuff, and the sun has a 12-year cycle of high activity and low activity. So every 12 years it shifts back and forth and it changes our climate.
I had a friend write me about it yesterday. He's a climate scientist. He's not one of those on the bandwagon of global warming or climate change, as they now like to call it. He works at a science museum in Kentucky, and he wrote me yesterday, and he said also, if you combine these cycles, and you get the 2-decade cycle, because one will operate almost in reverse. He said if you go back 22 years or so, 24 years or so, you can see almost identical weather patterns to what we're experiencing now, because these are the low ends of the cycles, and they match up every 22 to 24 years. So he's pointing that out too, and no one's paying any attention to it. It's as if, again, you have media folks who just will not cover various angles on stories because they don't want the general public to know a lot about it. And unless most people don't get up in the morning saying, I'm going to go look and see on the computer what sunspots are doing today, it doesn't cross most people's minds, right? So you wouldn't know.
I think the biggest thing is the whole global warming thing is just Al Gore and all of his buddies just finding new ways of taxing corporations and people. And they're talking about adding new fuel taxes here and there. I mean, like my grandfather always told me, never trust the priest that drives the most expensive car in town.
Yes.
And that's exactly what we're seeing with politicians and all these people that are making our laws, is they're living lifestyles that are almost unimaginable to the rest of us.
Well, you've got to remember, thank you for the call. The whole global warming alarmist thing is a very profitable business. For Al Gore, the speaking tours and the movies, narrating the movies, he's paid handsomely for that. If you're building the giant pinwheels that are stretched out across state after state after state right now, you're making a lot of money from that off the taxpayers. It's a scam. But the point of the matter is, it is greatly enhancing the wealth of the people who are supporting this theory. And we don't get into the depth of that too often when we talk about it. Otherwise, if you try, they just say, oh, you're walking around dragging your knuckles. You Neanderthals have to get with the program. 8:51:39 at our studios. You're up next on Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Hello, Bill. Good morning.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, one thing other people are not talking about either is these chemtrails they spray almost on a daily basis over us. If you watch the weather, they spray the stuff here, and within 2 days they're having severe storms. Sometimes it's up the northeast, sometimes it's through the middle, sometimes it's down south. It depends on which way they shoot the clouds from here. Just how the people start looking, and they call them vapor trails, but they're chemtrails. A vapor trail from an airplane dissipates very rapidly.
There was a guy a number of years ago who decided to do an experiment. I think it was in the late 1990s, and I happened to hear about this. He flew in a big circle just off the coast of California by Catalina Island, and they created a great big oval of chemtrail right behind the plane. And then that thing actually filled in the center. Once the circle was complete, the rest of it filled in the center like a cloud. Get this, it drifted all the way to Georgia before it finally broke up. It drifted all the way across the continent. I have a friend, he's been running a dairy farm. He's my best friend as a kid growing up. He's been running his grandfather's old dairy farm for 34 years now. And he says that he could see the difference, too, in air traffic going from 1981, when he'd be out on the tractor in the fields. He could see the difference. He could look up and see, a few vapor trails going over. He said, but what happened in the course of 15 to 20 years was amazing. He said it's at least quadrupled in the time that he's been on the farm. Now, he told me that story sometime probably 15 years ago, so it's probably even more so now. Even if they didn't intend it, look what they're creating because of all of the tic-tac-toe going on up there. If the circles are filling in, then again, so are some of those squares that are coming across the sky, or the triangles or whatever they leave behind when they're actually doing that. I used to, of course, live close enough to Washington, D.C. when I lived out on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake. And I sat on a friend's back porch one night, and we looked up at the sky after sunset and just marveled because you had so many major airports and bases, just tremendous amount of naval and Air Force bases around. Just in the evening, too, the traffic that's going on up there. Does it have an impact? I don't know that the jet fuel has an impact. But yes, I think some of the trails up there are certainly going to have various impacts. Now, the government will deny that they're putting anything in those trails, but think how easy that would be done. And it wouldn't even have to be, here's a drug to control the population, let's put it in the chemtrails and dust everyone with it. There could be any number of things in those trails that are impacting you individually. And they could just be ancillary to whatever else is going on up there. It's 8:54. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And again, you can reach me by email as well at bill.colley at townsquaremedia.com. And I spell the last name Colley. I touched on this about the weather because there is a story out. It's been getting a lot of press in the media because it fits the global warming narrative. The warning is that it was published in the Washington Post about a week ago, and it's been picked up by a number of other outlets as well, that by 2050, that everything west of the Mississippi will be desert in this country. And, what we're seeing already down in Arizona and in parts of California, that will extend and it will cover all of the states west of the Mississippi River. And they're saying that this is because of the climate change that's coming, but also because of land use and population policies. So, they're going to be screaming, it's the end of the world. And if we can only avoid it, the simplest solution is we have to put everyone on trains, move them to a fusion center somewhere on the East Coast, somewhere buried in the Appalachian Mountains, and we will save the western part of the country, and we will save the breadbasket of the planet. But first, you can't live here any longer, and we're going to force you to move. Yeah. It'll be a brand new Trail of Tears. Here's the thing, though. A friend of mine sat down and told me, I was working at a TV station years, and again, a lot of these stories go back years, and I've just been able to save them as sort of a file card system. And he was saying to me, he said, I've been doing a lot of reading about the people who went west and settled this country. As they started on the East Coast, obviously, and moved westward, and he said they made all sorts of references to the Great Western Desert. And they were referring to what they saw once they left St. Louis. Not what they saw once they got to Salt Lake, or they got to Santa Fe, or they got to the Mojave Desert. They were referring to the Great Plains. It was called the Great American Desert. Now, this was 150, 160, 75 years ago. Well, okay, apparently climate does change. But again, it changed then without any assistance from somebody building smokestacks or driving automobiles or flying airplanes. It just simply changed as it does frequently as a natural occurrence. And so we're being warned that the drought here in southwestern Idaho and in other parts of the West is going to be severe again and is going to continue, and that we've got to make changes now, and we've got to pack everyone up and force them to move to some other place. Of course, once you get to some other place, then there'll be too many of you there. I guess we'll have to cull the herd. Well, you're going to have libbies out there who are going to make those arguments. And they'll say it's necessary. They don't want to cull themselves, of course. That's would be against their religion, if you could call it that. We've got about a minute before we have the top of the hour break, a hard break for news from Fox coming up at 9 o'clock. We'll take one more caller if I can squeeze them in for a moment. You're up next on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, and what's on your mind?
Good morning, Bill. The Great Desert was changed to beautification by us. I mean, we came and we made ditches and we routed water off of the river and we dug up the weeds and plants and we planted stuff and we made it beautiful.
Yeah, you drive through Kansas or Nebraska, you see trees growing that weren't native to those areas.
If you take out all the wells and you take out all the ditches, it'll be a desert again.
Yeah, and you know maybe that's the goal of these people. They certainly believe that the snail darter and some of these other animals are clearly more important than human beings are. Well, we know that because of their stance when it comes to killing babies in the womb, where their heart really lies. Like I said years ago, and thank you for the call. Years ago, I interviewed a woman from PETA, and finally I said to her, "So how do you feel about abortion?" "Well, that's not my issue." So they're more concerned about some bunny rabbit than they are human beings. They are sick, twisted, miserable human beings. God have mercy on their souls. Hey, we have another hour of this program coming up in just a few minutes. Fox News, though, first at 9 o'clock. I had an off-air discussion the other day with Steve Millington from the Twin Falls County Republican Party, and we got a chuckle out of this because we both see it coming to a state near you. That is a report out of Colorado about how marijuana has boosted tax revenue for the state. 7 minutes after 9 o'clock, 41, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as anywhere around the world on newsradio1310.com. I found this at the Daily Caller. The marijuana industry generated $700 million of economic activity in Colorado alone in 2014, according to recently released data from the Department of Revenue, but reports that residents are set to receive tax refunds from overflowing revenue are false. Gee, you mean government's just going to suck all of that up? Yeah, government is a bit like that guy in, if you ever saw the original Logan's Run, the robot that kept saying, plankton, and creatures from the sea, Or how about the Little Shop of Horrors? Feed me! You get the same type of idea that government is just one of these monoliths and it's got to be fed constantly. In terms of revenue, the writer says, the state brought in about $63 million directly from high taxes and $13 million from licenses and assorted fees, according to an analysis from the Washington Post. Now, by next year, the amount of economic activity is expected to pass $1 billion. So that means state tax revenue will likely be pegged at about $100 million. You take a state like Idaho, where we've been having these discussions, how much money is it going to take to put into our schools to get them up to the point where legislators say they need to be? The governor's saying schools have to be a priority. He's talking K through 12, not necessarily secondary education, but he's talking K through 12. He's not talking about colleges and the like, at least not at the moment. And then we keep hearing about the need to fix roads and bridges. Now, considering Colorado has a big city like Denver, much bigger than anything here in Idaho, and it's got a couple of other large cities, Colorado Springs and the like, they have a bigger population, and they're likely bringing in more tourists who come for the skiing and the dope. But if you're living in Idaho and you say, well, okay, of course, we're right by Washington State, which is doing it, and if they're doing it and making money, and Colorado's not too far away and they're doing it and making money, you understand the pressures legislators, no matter what their political party or beliefs, will be under. If someone says we need $50 million to fix roads, someone's going to say, well, you know, in Colorado, they're bringing in $100 million in tax revenue from all of this dope business. And someone else is going to go, oh, $50 million we need, huh? Dope, huh? And here you go. This is how the walls are broken down. It's like gambling. Gambling started in a couple of states, Nevada and then eventually New Jersey. And the rest of the country sat around watching these people rake in. Back then, you didn't have any competition, obviously. So they raked in all sorts of dollars in those two states. And it was a boon if you lived in Nevada because it pretty much took care of everything. You didn't have to worry too much about being overtaxed as a resident of that state. So then other states started saying, well, we want a share of that business. Now you've got a casino on every corner, don't you? Everywhere you go, you can have an opportunity to gamble, it seems. First of all, there are lotteries ubiquitous. I can go into any grocery store around here or most convenience stores, and I can pick up a lottery ticket if I want one. And you've got the argument still going on about these terminals. You bet on the race after it happened, the horse racing terminals that are being set up on many Indian reservations. But you've got one side saying they're harmless, so they'll likely figure out a compromise for that to continue, or the state will ask for a share of it, and then there'll be a bit of a fight over it, but somebody will get a share out of it. So once you've put a casino on every corner, and I go back to that analogy, if you live in a small town and there's no gas station and people have to drive 15 miles away to buy gas, and your little light bulb goes off, you open up a gas station on one corner. And all of a sudden, people are like, wow, this is good. I don't have to drive all the way to Buell to fill up on gas. So they come to your gas station, and even though there's a narrow margin that you're making as the guy pumping the gas, you're still doing pretty well because you're the only gas station in town. Another guy says, I want a share of that. So he opens up a gas station across the street. By the time you get at that intersection where you've got a gas station on all four corners, it's not quite so profitable for any of those people anymore. And that's where we've gone with casinos. So drug legalization seems to be, and they won't stop with marijuana. Let's be honest about this. The libertarians have been fighting this cause, and of course they've got the young people on their sides, and the young people are the future. Those of us in old age who think that we should always have prohibitions against things like heroin and cocaine, we're going to be pushed by the wayside. We'll end up in our graves. We won't have any say in this. So eventually they'll legalize far more than marijuana with the effort to tax it. And of course the argument is, well, at least it'll be out in the open. We'll know who the junkies are. We'll be able to provide treatment. So we'll take that tax revenue and provide treatment to the people who are just drooling maniacs because they've been taking all of these drugs, along with the people we're treating for their gambling addictions at huge expense. But by golly, look at all the money we brought in. So then they'll try that. And then the final domino will be just legalized prostitution everywhere. Because, there'll be arguments made, well, yeah, but it'll take it off the streets, and then we'll be able to send doctors in and they can check out the women. Woohoo! And so this is where you're going. But when I said to Steve Millington the other day, I said, you know what? I do see this as being an issue because someone in Boise is going to look at it and say, maybe we should do that here. And he said, oh, yeah. He said, I don't have any doubt. And it'll happen soon. It may happen before the end of this legislative session. Someone will likely float the idea just before they wrap up so they can get the seed out there and see if it will sprout by the time they come back next year. And that's the direction we're headed. 9:13, 42 right now at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And the argument's going to be, hey, this is a big state. People are spread out all over the place. People are already growing lots of dope and smoking lots of dope. Why should we keep putting people away? Look at the expense of that. That part of it makes rational sense, I know. But we keep crossing all of these moral lines, and I don't know that there's any turning back. At some point, you just end up with, a great big national bacchanalia going on. As a friend of mine once said, the next thing we're going to see are people who are going to be pushing so that they can marry horses, cows, and pigs, or brothers or sisters or dads or uncles, and then that'll happen. Polygamy will return. We'll have all of these things going on, and everyone on the left will simply say, and the libertarians on the very far right, you can't interfere with my pursuit of being happy, as if being stoned all the time and rubbing yourself up against a tree all the time is somehow a definition of happiness. It's 9:14. Bill Colley with you this morning, again on Top Story. You can reach our program if you're so inclined. I know that it takes a really disturbed soul to pick up that telephone and call me any morning. 736-0300. That is 736-0300. I am also available by email, and that is bill.colley at townsquaremedia.com, and the last name is spelled Colley. Got an email here earlier from our comments about what was going on with the White House trying to push the idea that terrorism will go away if we find them good jobs at minimum wage. Yeah. Somebody sent me along a picture of someone and said, this guy had a good job and still did jihad. There you go. It's the ignorance, of course, of the fact that we're talking a little bit about people's religious beliefs, and that does tend to trump a lot of those other things. It's 9:15. You're up next on News Radio 13 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Who do we have here? What's on your mind?
I don't know if you talked about it yet this morning, Bill. I was reading the paper this morning about the dairy industry being concerned because they don't have enough workers to run the dairies in the Magic Valley. I wonder if we were in North Dakota and they didn't have enough workers to run the oil fields, what they would do up there to take care of that issue. And the obvious thing is, if they pay them, they would come. I'd like to know your opinion on that.
Well, and of course, as I mentioned in the last segment of the program, my best friend is a dairy farmer. He's been running his grandfather's old farm for 34 years now. He told me not long ago, he said that when he first got on the farm, and of course, that's all he ever wanted to do. You know, he loved it. And as a kid, that's all he wanted to do was work on farms during his vacations and breaks from school and after school and the like. But he said that when he got on the farm, he could find a lot of other young people who wanted to do the same. But he said then all of a sudden it just evaporated. He said in the late 80s through the 90s and the beginning of the last decade, he said he just could not find people. No one wanted to be involved with farming because of the commitment, especially the time commitment that you have to make. It's a lot of time. And as he jokes, you only get wealthy when you decide to sell your herd and move to Florida. And that's usually at retirement. So there's no money in it before that. But he said that when the recession hit in 2008, and it was so deep, he said he suddenly found all sorts of people who wanted to work on the farm again. And I don't think that's turned around, even though the government says, unemployment is 5.7%. I think that for most people, we realize that number is just complete malarkey. And I think his point is that he's still got people who are looking for work. They're begging for work. And so it's a simple economics issue here. When people are desperate, they will do just about anything for a job. And all of a sudden, being out working outside or working at a barn and communing with nature suddenly seems a lot better. But again, his point was that trying to get people interested in the farm lifestyle is not easy anymore because they have so many other things, distractions in life. That's why you have that website, farmersonly.com, is because it's very difficult to find a mate. If you go to, even a good-looking, handsome young guy meets a woman and says, oh, if we ever settle down, you could help me on the farm for the next 50 years. What? And I'm sorry, but that's what's happening. Increasingly, people are looking at that, and more people, the young people want to move to cities. They don't want anything to do with small-town life. They think it's hip to live in a city and put up with all the crime and the congestion and hang around at the local bistro like they're in an old episode of Friends. And of course, when they finally get there and they realize it takes more money to do that than the television people let you know about it, it's a little bit of a shock to them. That's why I guess they suspect government should be there playing more mommy and daddy for them in those situations. But this shortage of labor on the farm is only going to get worse. And it's just a cultural change that we're going through, and we've been going through for the last 60 or 70 years. We're coming up on a short break where we're going to hear from some of our fine sponsors again this morning. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story. Right now it's 9:19. Excuse me, I'm getting behind myself. 42 at our studios. And also, speaking of work, Western States Bus Services is hiring part-time bus drivers right now. Split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. The pay is $10.75 per hour. You could apply today by contacting 733-8003. That telephone number again is 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. I have a bit more ahead. The government's effort to take over the internet, picking up steam. In fact, the whole FCC thing may be a bit of a smokescreen because another government agency is looking to crack down and may do far more harm to your liberties as well as your access to the internet. We'll talk about that coming up before the program wraps up today, I'm sure. 9:20 and still 42 at our studios at News Radio 1310 KLIX. There was talking about this situation where the states will be looking to pick up additional income from the legalization of dope. There's a map that Washington Examiner put up yesterday. In fact, I sent it to, still there if you'd like to take a look at it, at our Facebook page, News Radio, let me get that full word out, News Radio 1310. Sometimes, your mouth and your brain don't work in conjunction. News Radio 1310 KLIX, that's our Facebook page. And I posted a story, how much debt does your state have? Now, Idaho's actually in better shape than most states around the country, but we're not in the top tier. I was looking that over yesterday, and so Idaho is in the second tier when it comes to debt per population. Most of the places that have the highest debt per population, per person in the population, are back in the very cold parts of the East. As I said yesterday, is there a correlation between the cold that they're currently experiencing and the political party that's in charge in most of those states? And I don't know, I just throw that out there for your edification. But if you'd like to take a look at that, go to our Facebook page. It's all sorts of neat stuff there. There's actually a picture of Gillette Stadium in New England filled with snow. In fact, I saw one at Fenway Park yesterday in Boston. As far as I'm concerned, if it's still snowy at Fenway Park or in any American League ballpark by the time we get to May or June, that'd be a good thing. Actually, if they could bury Yankee Stadium in concrete, we could just forget about those people and just move on and maybe have an enjoyable baseball season without some of the circuses we usually get as sideshows. Because that's the main sideshow in New York. He's coming back. We had 13 more teams, I think, report for spring training today. And that would be Alex Rodriguez, who I have a friend who works for the New York Yankees. And he was on a radio show with me one time, and I said, anybody that you know in the clubhouse that's really not a very nice guy? And he said, Alex Rodriguez. He called me up after the show and said, I shouldn't have said that, because if that gets back to the organization, even if it did, everyone knew that the guy was, how you call it, a narcissist? He's the Barack Obama of Major League Baseball. All right, now we've got it. There's a good description. It's 9:26. Bill Colley with you this morning. You can reach me at 736-0300 on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Also online at newsradio1310.com. I have about, half an hour to go before we wrap up the program today. I mentioned this. We might have to stretch it into the next segment if I run out of time. We've been warning you that a week from now, on the 26th, the Federal Communications Commission is scheduled to change the way the internet works in this country with something called net neutrality, with the idea that eventually the government will have to become the sole provider of internet service. Gee, now how's that going to work out? Well, that's worrisome enough, okay? But I think what we're missing is another government agency's involvement. FCC is Federal Communications Commission. Right now, they only have jurisdiction over broadcast air. That means radio and television broadcast over the air. They don't have jurisdiction over cable. They don't have jurisdiction over the internet. But you can see the big government effort to try and control everything going on here. But that's not enough. Something called the Federal Elections Commission is also being sicked upon the internet. A writer by the name of Ernest Istook, and if you don't know the name, he was a very conservative constitutionalist member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Oklahoma for many, many years. He says, this is about the blob and how we lose our right of free speech. FEC, he's talking about, Federal Elections Commission. Government never admits that it wants to control you. Instead, it claims it wants to protect you. One example is the Federal Election Commission. It's proposed that we allow the FEC to regulate political speech on the internet. I guess that's because you might see something and it might hurt you. Oh, my eyes are burning. Ah! So now they have to come in and ensure that you don't see anything that you might find offensive. Supposedly, he writes, the FEC has jurisdiction only over candidates for federal office, but it has stretched that mandate to control the process of elections, not merely the candidates. The problem is that today everything is considered political. It's a great point to be made. And campaigns are perpetual. So essentially, the FEC is being urged to control all speech all the time. You realize that if you go to Facebook and you post something about Obamacare, I think Obamacare is a crock. That's political speech. You've crossed that boundary. And that's what he's saying. So much of what we talk about today is political speech. So therefore, they've got their tentacles and they're going to reach out and just jam those tentacles into everything we talk about. He writes, because government has intruded into everything, virtually every topic can be deemed political, and therefore part of electioneering, and therefore regulated by the FEC, from healthcare and the weather, i.e. climate change, to education, water use, family structures, the foods we eat, and the medicines we take. Because government keeps expanding, he writes, the definition of political speech grows like the blob to a monstrous size that threatens our freedoms, our liberties, if you will. That means your right to choose what you see, what you eat, what you read, where you go. All of these things are under threat continually. He says, but this time it's not just a movie, it's a real threat. And he says the second key reason why limited campaign regulation continues to grow is that almost every day is election day someplace. It could be a presidential primary or a House or Senate primary or a runoff election or a state or local race involving issues that are also national. Early voting elongates the government's restricted time for electioneering. California allows people to vote 30 days before Election Day in November. That turns a 30-day restriction into a 60-day restriction. So yes, you can see the direction we're going with this. And you know what? There's a guy sitting in the White House, old Obama right now, just licking his lips at the thought that he's going to be able to control you even more. 9:30, 41 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I'd like to point out again, if you'd like to reach the show, email is one way to do it. If you're a little shy about talking on the telephone, you can email me at bill.colley, that's C-O-L-L-E-Y, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. But you can just ring me up at 736-0300, 736-0300 at News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story with Bill Colley, 934. 42 is our temperature. We have someone who's been trying to reach me rather urgently over the last couple of minutes, and I want to go to the telephones right off the bat here coming out of this break. And you're up next. Just want to say to you, what's on your mind? And let's dispense with all of the good mornings, and how are you doing today?
Well, I just wanted to make a quick something Ronald Reagan said in one of his speeches that kind of rang with me is the 9 most terrifying words in the American language, or English language, excuse me, are I am from the government and I'm here to help.
Yes.
and you look at what's going on now and compare it to the past, the whole past repeats itself thing. The Nazis did pretty much the same thing to the Jews and their citizens. They came in and they said, hey, we're here to help. And they did it in small bits. They did this. Oh, this is just to make sure that everybody's okay. Oh, this is just to make sure. This is just to make sure. Well, eventually they went so far, they ended up putting all the Jews in concentration camps.
Yeah.
And people think, oh, that can't happen again. Well, it can't if we don't keep our government in check.
Look, it's all about, we go back to that theory of Agenda 21, and it's not a theory. I mean, there's a lot of truth to this. There are people who support it. It's given different names in different places all over the country. I went to a presentation a few years ago from Maggie Rodden from Republic Radio, and she had multiple examples of this all over the country. But it's that whole, they plant these stories saying we're going to have a desert west of the Mississippi River and all of the Northwest and Southwest will be virtually uninhabitable, so we're going to have to move all of these people. Well, they'll move you to Portland and put you on bike trails and trams and make you live in cinder block housing. That's the goal.
There's a few things you can look at that kind of show you what's going on. A movie by called 1984 by I think it's George Orwell.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome movie. Great movie.
There's a version of that out that was very good with the actor John Hurt, along with it was the last movie ever made by Richard Burton.
I don't think I've seen that one. But something else you can look at is there's a document out there called A Stability Police Force of the United States, written by the RAND Corporation, and it outlines exactly how they want to basically put martial law in effect.
Yeah, and no relation to Ayn Rand,
terrifying.
we should point out. No relation whatsoever. Thank you much for the telephone call. And you're up next. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX with Top Story and Bill Colley. And what thoughts are crossing your mind?
Well, Bill, we know what the Democrat Party is. We know what the fascist liberals are. We know what the Democrats, we know what they are. Where are the people we elected to stop this intrusion on our free speech and our... I mean, I can't even believe it. It just seems like they're out to lunch whenever we need them the most to stop this executive order nonsense and to stop this internet intrusion and to stop this, what you were just talking about, the free speech. I mean, where are they?
Well, take a guy like Ted Cruz, who's been speaking out about the internet intrusion and the terrorist issues and the like, and he's just been completely... All right, well, thanks for the call. Ted Cruz is completely marginalized by mainstream media, and they tend to call him a kook. They call him a reincarnation of Eugene McCarthy. It was not Eugene, rather, but the other McCarthy from Wisconsin from the 1950s. And they just hammer away at these people. It's almost as if their job is to discredit anybody who's a threat to the narrative, and that narrative is just to go along with this overall arching plan that they have. The Paul family themselves, I mentioned Ayn Rand, not any relation to the Rand Corporation, Rand Paul and his dad, marginalized by people. Oh, well, they're kooks. And then you repeat that often enough, oh yeah, they got to be kooks. Let's not listen to what they're saying or the explanation of why they're saying it. Let's just go along and jump on the bandwagon and call them kooks. And I also think there's just this tremendous inertia in government. You look at that, and you got 535 people from all of these varying aspects. And, of course, our founders may have liked the idea of gridlock and nothing getting done. But we have a tax system in this country, this income tax system, that is just completely out of control. I have been in media, one form or another, since 1986. Radio, newspaper, television, done it all. I ran that gamut. Now I do internet and things like that too as well. And I'm going to tell you, I have been hearing for at least 25 years about alternatives to the income tax. Multiple alternatives. Why don't we have one? Everyone agrees it stinks. All right? How come we haven't done anything about it? Here, we've had how long? At some point, just pick one. If the other one doesn't work, pick one, and we'll see if that works. And if it doesn't work in a couple of years, we'll pick another one. There are ways around all of this, but we simply can't seem to get anyone to move on it. They'll come to the town hall meetings, you'll bring it up, and they'll go, yeah, good idea, yeah, oh, wonderful idea. Joe over here, take some notes so we can get this down. Yeah. And then they dump it in the circular file, apparently, on the way out the door, 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you this morning. It's 42, looking for a high perhaps near 60 today in some spots. Maybe not quite in Twin Falls. I think we're looking more in the lower 50s. You'll have complete details on the weather update. In fact, just after the 10 o'clock news this morning, Rush Limbaugh will follow news at 10 o'clock. Hope you can stick around for that too as well, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX. We are somewhat in the stretch run of the program today, about 6 minutes away from Reverend Governor Mike Huckabee and the Huckabee Report, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Of course, the Huckabee Report is brought to you by, and this is exclusively by, the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. There's a grab bag of stories that some stories, good stories that we never get to every day, just for time limitations. And tomorrow being Friday, more time limitations, and then by Monday, they'll be sometimes forgotten, so I thought I would just do a little hopscotching here in this portion of the program. Mike Rowe, the guy who hosted the TV show Dirty Jobs, he's a fascinating man from Baltimore, Maryland originally. CNN's Mike Rowe takes Howard Dean to task for calling Scott Walker unknowledgeable. Howard Dean, the former governor of Vermont, I was working there in TV when he was governor, and he was a jerk. Never on time for anything, I should point out. He needed someone to sort of shoehorn him or move him along for his appointments or whatever that he needed to get to that he just constantly was running late for. Now, he grew up in a blue-blooded family on Long Island and got all sorts of favors throughout his life and ended up becoming Dr. Howard Dean. Never really practiced medicine, got into politics, and he was a lieutenant governor when the Republican governor of his state died, leaving him as governor, and then now he's just a big mouth on MSDNC. He said that Scott Walker was unknowledgeable because he didn't finish college, even though 68% of Americans never have. Abraham Lincoln never went to college. Abraham Lincoln never went to a formal schoolhouse, ended up being perhaps the greatest president in the United States, in the history of the United States. Well, Mike Rowe says Dean neglects to understand there's a difference between competency and qualifications. And he said, I auditioned for QVC. when I was a young man. I had to go in and they gave me a pencil and they said, talk about this pencil for 8 minutes. He said, because they had tried TV anchors, they had tried actors, and they had tried salespeople, and they had discovered that so many of these people could not sit down and talk about a pencil for 8 minutes. So qualifications didn't necessarily matter to them. It was your competency to do what you needed to do while you were on air hawking a product. He says that's where Dean, obviously, well, Howard Dean's an elitist, and that's simply what it all comes down to. Some of the other things I wanted to mention, Marie Harf, the State Department spokeswoman who said that all Muslims need, the terrorists need, are good jobs, and they won't be going around killing people and burning people and chopping heads off and nailing people to crosses and raping women. The major networks, the old alphabet networks, all skipped that story. Yeah, it never happened, according to them. Here's another one. Michael Bloomberg asked police to take guns away from minorities. He is now trying to squelch that speech. He actually has been using his legal team to try to keep his speech off Yahoo, or YouTube rather, in various places. But the networks have ignored the story. Now, they're covering the story of Dinesh D'Souza, saying that President Obama's goofy video last week is ghetto, as D'Souza described it. And they're saying, oh, this rotten conservative, how dare he? He must be a bigoted conservative for sure and a hater. But Michael Bloomberg says black people shouldn't have guns, or Latinos shouldn't have guns. And all of a sudden it's ignored by all of the libbies in media. Wonder why that is. So I've been jumping around looking at a lot of these different stories that we never really get a chance to really delve into a whole heck of a lot. But I think it's really good. Here's another one. How about Biden groping the new defense secretary's wife as the new defense secretary was being introduced the other day? There's a history of Biden doing this. He did it to a reporter at a Christmas party. He went into a biker bar in Akron, Ohio, and he's sitting there with one of the biker chicks on his lap while her husband sits next to him and whispering in her ears at the time. And there are multiple instances of this that have taken place over the years. And yet Biden was the guy who was going around saying it's never appropriate for a man to touch a woman when she doesn't want to be touched in an inappropriate way. And the major networks are ignoring that story as well. Well, that's just Joe being Joe. Ha, 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 ha. You got Bill Clinton, who may have been a serial rapist. Remember how they treated him? But you wouldn't get away with it if you were Bob Livingston from Louisiana. Biden, of course, was taking lessons from Bob Packwood for many, many years. Here's another one that this is another one of those stories mainstream media is not covering. Former Saturday Night Live actress Victoria Jackson, on Political Bias at Anniversary show, she asks if Lorne Michaels, the producer, is ashamed of her because she showed up she was on the show for 5 years. She showed up for the 40th anniversary show the other day. They took her and stuck her into an overflow room. She never got on the program. They never asked her to be on the program. They just decided they didn't want her around. Why? Well, she's a conservative Christian. She is pro-life, and she backs many Tea Party issues. And it's been raised now by some people on Twitter and in social media that they just did not want her. She's the ugly redheaded stepchild when it comes to the liberals who run that particular program, isn't it? And I didn't see it. I have to get to bed early, but as I understand it, they did a parody on Weekend Update where Jane Curtin says, I used to tell people news that was a lie and a phony and a joke, and now there's a whole network devoted to it. And they put a graphic up over her shoulders of Fox News. And everyone in the audience went, ha, 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 look at the funny liberal, ha, ha, ha. Meanwhile, somebody at their own network was just cashiered because he was fibbing for decades. Nope, not going to mention that one, are we? It's enough of that. In the meantime, Mike Huckabee is coming up in just a moment. Again, the Huckabee Report is brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. That number again, 736-6563. I want to thank Reverend Governor Huckabee again for joining us for a couple of minutes this morning. Bill Colley with you on Top Story just for another couple of brief minutes myself. 43 right now. That is 42 degrees warmer than my sister has in her hometown right now. More of that global warming that they need desperately, desperately may not be on the way for a long, long time. It's 9:55, and I'd like to point out Rush Limbaugh, too, coming up next following news from Fox at 10 o'clock. Sean Hannity following Fox News at 1 o'clock this afternoon, and Glenn Beck following Fox News at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Huckabee was talking about all of the refugees coming into this country. And do we have a valid system for making sure that all of these refugees coming in are going to be people who are safely here? That is, that will not pose a threat to us. Well, if you need an example, this is from the Washington Times. Immigration risk assessment on illegal immigrants is not effective, according to the Inspector General's office, which is a federal office in the Department of Homeland Security. U.S. officials, the writer says, have little idea whether some illegal immigrants commit crimes or flee from authorities after being set free by law enforcement. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, uses a process called the Intensive Supervision Appearance Program for some illegal immigrants as an alternative to detention. Only officials haven't been keeping track of the participants. Oops. Yeah, well, yeah, I've been kind of busy. I've been on my coffee break. Leave me alone. Immigration officials asked illegal immigrants if they had a medical condition that could affect their detention or release, but some officers relied simply on the immigrants' answers without conducting a medical evaluation, the report said. See. All right, you can go. Are you a good guy or a bad guy? I'm a good guy. All right, you can go. Are you a criminal? No. All right, you can go. What kind of government is running this operation? They're so concerned about the internet clamping down on you. They're so concerned that you might decide to worship in a particular way. They're so concerned that you might refuse because of your religious beliefs to bake a cake for somebody. And yet they can't handle this issue? Clearly, this must be done on purpose. Very quickly, I have to squeeze one last caller in. You're up next at 9:56. Good morning.
Hello. I've just completed a 10-month process. A 10-month process to get my wife here from the Philippines. I married her in the Philippines a little over a year ago. And it included a criminal background check. And she got 3 injections for about 10 vaccinations, chest x-rays, a complete physical, and a clean bill of health. And they arrest these people. They should at least put them through all this process. And then, they should just deport them. But this is ridiculous. We wonder why measles are entering the country.
Yeah, you know what she should have done? She should have just whipped out a scimitar and yelled, "Allah Akbar!" And then they would have said, "All right, you can go through."
Oh, yeah, she should have declared herself a Democrat. That would have worked. But then she wouldn't have been able to marry me. But that's
well, there you go. Thank you much. Would have been one of those mixed marriages we hear about all the time. 9:57, wrapping up the program today. Yeah, the hoops that some people have to jump through, which are completely nonsensical. And yet, if you show up and, hey, I'll help crash the system and I'll vote for all sorts of toys from the Obama White House. All right, you can pass. We're aware of what's going on. That's the problem. Even we talked about the poll from Georgia yesterday. Even Democrats in Georgia overwhelmingly want this to come to a stop. Why is government being so tone deaf? Well, of course, they know better than the rest of us. Clearly, we are not as smart as they are. We're like the Morlocks from the Time Machine. And there's some big albino there ensuring that he controls our minds, because otherwise we would exhaust the food supply. Because, of course, the albino is so much smarter than all of the rest of us. All right, I'm not trying to insinuate anything. I just use that movie as an example. I mean, clearly the guy in charge is not an albino, but that's not saying that I'm trying to do some sort of reverse. You know that the liberals are going to claim I'm doing that. They're going to the web right now, pounding away on their keyboards. That man is inferring that. Take a Valium. Get some rest. Limbaugh following news at 10 o'clock. Thanks for joining me. God willing and the creek don't rise. I'm back tomorrow.